Jasmine Crockett destroys Jeanine Pirro in brutal congressional government clash, a real-life AP, YouTube. https://www.youtube.com/watch?v=y9yjaguxco. Transcript. Midnight, in a live studio built to control the narrative, Jasmine Crockett is invited as a guest only to realize she's the target of a calculated on-air ambush by Jeanine Pirro. Jeanine tries to corner her, branding her a race hustler in a fiery debate over a loaded question. 023, our racial justice advocates, truth tellers or opportunists fueling division. But just minutes later, Jasmine flips the entire stage with raw, unedited, and undeniable evidence that no camera cut can bury. The audience is stunned. The control room spirals and Jeanine Pirro vanishes from the network, her silence louder than any defense. What did Jasmine expose that was so damning it forced a judge off the air without a single word? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. 058, under the glossy banner of justice and truth, Jeanine Pirro prepared her most provocative episode yet. An hour-long special titled Race Hustlers, Who Profits from Division. The title alone was a trap, a provocation disguised as journalism. Behind the scenes, her team exchanged knowing looks. This wasn't about dialogue. It was about destruction. The target, Representative Jasmine Crockett. 126, to the audience, it would look like a debate, but to Jeanine, it was an ambush set in studio lights. The goal was simple. Corner Jasmine on live television, label her as a race hustler, and let the media do the rest. They had cut clips ready to frame her as incendiary, emotional, unhinged. This wasn't debate prep. 150, it was character assassination choreographed to the second. Jeanine didn't want truth. She wanted a takedown. Jasmine knew it. From the moment her team forwarded the invitation, she read the subtext between every word. But she didn't refuse. She didn't warn her staff. She didn't call allies. She accepted the invitation in silence. Cold, calculating, deliberate. 213, when the car arrived at the studio's private entrance, she stepped out alone. No campaign manager, no publicist, just her. She wore no jewelry, no bright colors, only a matte black suit that absorbed the light like a shadow. In one hand, a slim manila folder sealed tight. In the other, a USB drive she kept sliding into her blazer pocket like a blade being holstered. No words, no smiles, no nerves, just stillness. 244, producers watched her on the backstage monitor and whispered, "She looks tense." But they were wrong. Jasmine wasn't tense. She was sharpened. And then the light shifted. The red on-air sign lit up like a countdown to detonation. The hum of the studio transformed. 308, no longer just the background noise of production, but a rising tension alive and pulsing as if even the air understood what was about to unfold. Jeanine Pirro leaned forward in her chair, her hands clasped neatly, knuckles pale with control. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her power wasn't in volume. 332, it was in precision in the way she twisted a knife and made it look like a handshake. Jasmine Crockett, seated across from her, was composed but not relaxed. Her posture was a quiet warning, a calm before something no one in that room was prepared for. Jeanine struck with the subtlety of a seasoned prosecutor playing to the jury. 355, so, Congresswoman Crockett, let's start simple. Do you call that justice? The screen behind them lit up with a clip, muted but unmistakable. Jasmine pointing at a police chief, fire in her eyes, demanding answers about excessive force. Jeanine let the image hang like smoke before tossing the match. You raised your voice. You called the officers liars. 424, you accused an entire department of systemic abuse on camera. Is that what you call justice? Or is that just another performance for your followers on Twitter? It wasn't a real question. It was an accusation carefully framed to appear objective, but steeped in judgment, and it was layered. Underneath the words was something colder. 447, how dare you speak that way to power? How dare you, a black woman, confront authority without apology? Jeanine's tone had the weight of entitlement. She didn't seek an answer. She was setting the stage to discredit at everything Jasmine stood for. She wanted her off balance, defensive, cornered. But Jasmine didn't flinch. 5:09, she didn't raise her voice or shift in her seat. She let Janine's words hang in the air, sharp, rehearsed, wrapped in applause, and watched them fall flat under the weight of their own arrogance. The light caught the edge of her jawline as she turned her head just slightly, calmly until her gaze locked with Janine's. 5:29, her posture remained composed, almost statuesque, but there was a tension beneath it, coiled, intelligent, waiting. Then came her response, not loud, not theatrical, but grounded, carved out of quiet defiance. I represent the truth, and it seems that truth makes certain former judges very uncomfortable. The line didn't roar, but it echoed. 5:59, it didn't punch, but it landed hard, not just on Janine, but on every false premise that had built this segment. Jasmine had cut through the performance with a single sentence. The studio didn't move. Not a breath, not a cough. The silence was no longer awkward. It was absolute, like the room itself had braced for impact. Janine blinked once, a flicker of something, uncertainty, rage betraying her polished mask. 6:28, the audience, so quick to laugh moments before, sat frozen, unsure whether they had just witnessed a rebuttal or a reckoning. The camera operator instinctively zoomed in, capturing the moment as if it were evidence, because in a way it was. Two women stared at each other across a gulf, not just of ideology, but of lived truth and performative control. Jasmine's eyes didn't waver. She wasn't there to entertain. 6:54, she wasn't there to prove her worth to a room designed to discredit her. She had walked onto that stage with full knowledge of the imbalance. And yet she sat unmoved, unshaken, because unlike her opponent, Jasmine didn't need the audience to clap. She only needed them to see. The silence that followed Jasmine's calm defiance hung heavy, but Janine wasn't about to let it harden into something she couldn't control. 7:23, she had felt the floor shift just slightly beneath the weight of Jasmine's composure. And in that flicker of imbalance, she struck again, this time with spectacle. "Roll the clip," she said smoothly, almost with a smirk, her eyes never leaving Jasmine's face. There was no need to explain what clip. They all knew what was coming. This wasn't an impromptu rebuttal. It was a planned detonation. 7:47, the screen behind them flared to life. Dramatic background music rolled in low. Tension laced into its rhythm like a coiled spring. Then came the image, Jasmine standing at the house podium in a tense floor debate from the previous year. Her voice rang through the chamber, commanding, passionate. But what played now wasn't the full speech. 8:11, it was a patchwork, deliberately manipulated, stripped of all nuance. The edit cut in on her already mid-sentence. "This system is broken, and we are done pretending it serves us." Then a sharp jump, a flash of her hand hitting the podium. "You want peace. You want calm. Then stop brutalizing our communities." Another cut. Her voice louder now. 8:37, they don't hear us unless we scream. Freeze frame. Jasmine's mouth still opened mid-sentence, fist clenched. The freeze distorted her expression just enough to make her look furious, almost uncontrolled. To the casual viewer, it looked like a woman unraveling on the house floor. No explanation, no lead-up, no context, just a series of emotional flashes that painted her as aggressive, radical, dangerous. 9:12, Janine let the image linger for a beat too long before turning back toward the camera. Her delivery was crisp, practiced, and laced with contempt disguised as professionalism. "You see, she's not fighting for justice. She's fighting for applause." The audience laughed. Not all of them, but enough. Then came the clapping, light at first, then steady, as if someone backstage had given permission to approve. It wasn't spontaneous. 9:37, it was curated, intentional. A room trained to affirm the narrative it was fed. Janine leaned back, basking in the sound, that familiar rush of reinforcement. Only those with years behind a podium know how to drink in. But Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't grimace. She didn't even glance at the screen. 10:01, instead, a slow smile curled at the edge of her lips. Not wide, not mocking, just quiet, certain. The kind of smile someone wears when they've seen the trap coming long before they stepped into the room. Her voice when she finally spoke was steady, low, but unwavering with that grounded calm that makes people lean in rather than recoil. 10:20, you want to play the editing game? She asked almost gently, almost like a warning. Her hand moved to the inside pocket of her blazer. No rush, no drama, just deliberate motion like someone drawing not a weapon, but the truth. She pulled out a small black USB, set it on the table between them, and slid it forward with one finger. Then, let's play roll this clip. 10:48, the producer in the booth hesitated for a second. There was confusion. Janine hadn't pre-approved this, hadn't rehearsed it, hadn't signed off, but the room had changed. Even the studio lights seemed colder now. Janine opened her mouth, but Jasmine didn't give her the moment. 11:09, she lifted a single finger, not in anger, not to silence, but to indicate control. Quiet, certain. This one's unedited, she added, her eyes still on Janine. And unlike yours, it tells the whole story. There was no noise now, no laughter, no coughs or throat clearing, just stillness. The kind of stillness that falls when everyone in the room realizes they may have been watching the wrong story all along. 11:39, the atmosphere was already fractured, like glass beginning to splinter under pressure. But Jasmine wasn't done. Not even close. She knew that one unedited clip wasn't enough to expose the full architecture of manipulation that had been built around her and around millions like her by voices pretending to speak for justice while feeding outrage to the masses for profit. 12:11, the silence from the crowd, from Janine, from the entire studio wasn't a victory. It was a crack. Jasmine's next move was a hammer. She stood slowly, deliberately, her chair scraping softly against the polished studio floor. Her heels echoed in the space as she walked away from the interview desk, straight toward the control table near the edge of the stage. The technical crew tensed. This wasn't scheduled. 12:37, this wasn't rehearsed. But something in her presence made it impossible to stop her. No shouting, no chaos, just calm, concentrated purpose. She reached the producer's station where a laptop sat connected to the live feed system. Her movements were precise without hesitation. She picked up the USB drive she had slid earlier across the table, flipped open the port, and inserted it into the machine as if she'd rehearsed it 100 times. 13:11, in truth, she had rehearsed nothing, only prepared, only endured. She turned slightly toward the assistant seated beside the board and said, clear and firm. Play the second file. It's 90 seconds. No edits, full volume. Her tone wasn't loud, but it was immovable. She wasn't requesting, she was authorizing. 13:33, the producer looked to the booth above, seeking permission, but the delay cost them. The file began to load. The screen behind Janine flickering with a raw unpolished feed. The footage opened with a grainy timestamp. August 17, 2020. The setting, the Justice with Judge Janine studio. 13:57, moments after the show had gone off air, Janine was seated behind her desk, the lights dimmed, but the camera still rolling unbeknownst to her. She was pulling off her mic, shaking her head in frustration. A production assistant leaned in and asked a question. Janine, looking drained and impatient, exhaled and said without a shred of hesitation, I don't care about the truth as long as the ratings stay up. 14:22, the moment was casual, flippant, an unguarded glimpse into something uglier than bias. It was the quiet confession of someone who had long since stopped caring about accuracy, about justice, about responsibility, and had embraced performance as power. The room went still, but it wasn't just silence. 14:44, it was that particular kind of stillness that comes when an entire audience feels a sudden wave of shame for having clapped just minutes before. It was the look on faces when people realize they've been sold something dressed as conviction only to discover it was just product. 15:05, Janine froze in place, eyes locked on the screen, watching herself exposed by her own voice, her own truthless creed. Her posture stiffened, her hands curled slightly inward on the desk. Her face powdered to perfection under the studio lights was now visibly drained of its earlier confidence. This wasn't a debate anymore. This was a reckoning up in the booth. 15:28, chaos, one of the directors shouted for a hard cut, switch to blackout. Another barked. A producer's hand reached for the screen override, fingers just inches from killing the feed. A different voice called for a commercial break, loud enough to echo into the control room. The machine behind the screen was scrambling, not because what Jasmine had shown was false, but because it was undeniably true. They weren't prepared for that, but Jasmine was. 15:57, she turned back toward center stage, her silhouette framed against the massive screen, still replaying the clip. With calm but unshakable conviction, she stepped back into the light, raised her hand like a conductor stopping an orchestra, and said into her mic. Each word delivered with surgical force. No one cuts the feed when truth goes live. 1621, it wasn't a line. It wasn't a slogan. It was an order. And it landed harder than anything said that night. The crew froze. The override button was left untouched. No one in the room moved. No one in the control booth dared breathe. Jasmine had done more than defend herself. She had pulled back the curtain on the illusion itself. 1648, and standing beneath the glare of studio lights, she didn't look like someone trying to win. She looked like someone who had already won because she had made them all see what they had chosen not to look at, and there was no going back. The studio was already trembling beneath the surface, though no one had yet dared to name it. The last clip Jasmine had played, the behind. 1712, the scene's confession about chasing ratings over truth had detonated something foundational. But she knew that structural lies don't just collapse from one blow. They need to be torn down beam by beam until all that's left is the wreckage of unchecked power. 1735, she returned to her seat slowly with the composure of someone who understood that silence, once armed with truth, could be just as lethal as any outrage. But she wasn't finished. Not while the myth of Janine Pirro's moral high ground still hovered like a fog over the set. The pages had been waiting under her notes all along, unfolded only when the moment was sharp enough to cut through pretense. 1801, with quiet finality, Jasmine reached beneath the polished surface of the desk and removed a thin manila folder. It wasn't thick. It didn't need to be. Some truths don't require volume, only clarity. She placed it in front of her with the care of someone handling evidence, then slowly raised it, letting the DOJ letterhead catch the overhead lights. There was no need to hold it up to the camera. 1827, the words would carry farther than the image ever could. Her voice sliced through the room with the unflinching control of a closing argument. This is a copy of the federal criminal investigation into your attempt to plant a listening device in your ex-husband's car. You, a sitting judge trying to wire up your own spouse, violating federal privacy laws, and using your position to manipulate the legal system for personal revenge. 1858, no dramatics, no yelling, just the sound of a foundation cracking in real time. Across the studio, the producers froze mid-motion. Even the camera crew, so used to remaining invisible, suddenly found themselves holding their breath behind viewfinders. The tension was no longer between two political adversaries. 1923, it was between the facade of integrity and the reality that now stood exposed. Jasmine didn't rush. She let each word settle like dust on marble, and then stepped forward, placing the file on Janine's desk. And not tossed, not slid, but set directly and deliberately. Her eyes never left Janine's. 1944, the light that had once cast Janine as a seasoned veteran now exposed something different. The fine cracks forming in her expression, the subtle clench of her jaw, the brief flicker of her pupils, searching for an off-ramp, there was none. Jasmine's voice dropped only slightly. Calm, precise, lethal. You sat on the bench and called yourself an officer of the law. 2010, and yet, here's your legacy. Illegal surveillance, abuse of authority, and weaponizing your power for petty vengeance. That line didn't just sting, it dug. Because it wasn't just about the past, it was about the present. About the audacity of someone who had violated trust, claiming the right to question someone who had built her career exposing such abuse. 2040, Jasmine had been dragged into this studio to be dressed down, reduced to sound bites. But now she stood with receipts while her accuser sat wordless. She gave the folder a single quiet tap with her index finger, then posed the final question. Not for Janine, but for everyone watching. That's the ethical foundation you brought with you to this broadcast. 2103, and with that, the room froze. Not figuratively, not atmospherically. Actually froze. Janine didn't respond. Couldn't. Her throat moved as if trying to swallow back the avalanche behind her silence, but her lips never formed a word. Her shoulders, so often squared with performative certainty, slumped just slightly. The facade wasn't cracking anymore. It was crumbling. 2129, the camera, operating on instinct, and a gut-level sense of history being made, zoomed not on Janine's face, but on her hands, and there it was, the unmistakable tremble. One hand rested beside a glass of water, the other hovering just above it, fingers twitching, grasping for a kind of control that wasn't there anymore. 2154, the glass shook faintly on the surface, just enough for the audience at home to notice. Jasmine didn't press. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to, because in that moment the truth spoke for itself, and for once no one tried to interrupt it. The moment had already turned. Janine Pirro, once untouchable behind decades of courtroom authority and cable news bravado, now sat exposed. Her silence louder than any objection. 2223, but Jasmine Crockett knew something deeper needed to be confronted. Not just hypocrisy, but the systemic indulgence of it. The way power not only forgave certain failures, it rewarded them. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't break posture. She simply reached for a small black remote sitting just off to the side of the moderator station. 2248, her thumb hovered over a single button. When she pressed it, it wasn't a gesture of performance. It was a verdict. The screen behind them came alive with footage pulled from the network's own archives dated October 3, 2020. 9:03 p.m. A studge Janine that had quickly become infamous for all the wrong reasons. No music, no build-up, just a hard, uncut feed of Janine, slouched slightly in her chair, eyes glassy, blinking too often. 2326, she tried to read her lines off the teleprompter, but her cadence was off, her words slurred together. We have what looks like a foreign manipulation of our democratic AE. Her voice trailed. She chuckled mid-sentence, then waved vaguely off-screen. Just roll it, she muttered, but nothing rolled. The production assistant off-camera tried prompting her. 2350, she restarted only to stumble again. Viewers at home had watched in real time, confused and then horrified. Was she drunk? Was she ill? The clip ended with her sitting in awkward silence, blinking slowly, unaware her mic was still live. And then came the cover-up. 2400 hours 13, Fox News in a statement the next day blamed the entire moment on a technical difficulty with remote broadcasting. No mention of intoxication, no admission of personal fault. No apology to viewers or staff. Within a week, the incident vanished from their programming history. Scrubbed, buried, ignored. Janine returned the next Saturday, composed, unapologetic, untouched. 2400 hours 38, and for millions of women, especially women of color, who had been punished, sidelined, or humiliated for far less, it was a moment that never really disappeared. As the screen behind her faded to black, Jasmine didn't move. She stood in the same place, but the silence around her had transformed. It wasn't discomfort, it was confrontation. She wasn't just speaking to Janine anymore. 25:08, she was speaking into the bloodstream of an entire industry that had long defined professionalism as something white, cold, and controlled, as something she had been told she was not. Jasmine faced the camera Heaton, voice low, but unwavering. I was once told I wasn't professional enough to deserve this seat. She paused, not for drama, but for clarity. But the woman who couldn't finish a sentence on live TV because she couldn't control her own condition, she kept her slot. She got defended. She got protected. 25:40, her eyes narrowed not with anger, but with absolute certainty. Is that a double standard or just tradition? The words fell like iron, not loud, but heavy. They didn't invite applause. They demanded silence. In that moment, the set didn't feel like a studio. It felt like a courtroom. And Jasmine wasn't just the witness. She was the co-examiner. 26:04, the truth didn't need to shout. It had been seen. And no one, not even Janine Pirro, could edit it out. The tension hadn't lifted. If anything, it had grown denser, settling over the studio like storm clouds before the break. Jasmine had already dismantled the myth of equal standards. 26:26, but now she was ready to expose what had fueled that myth for years. Exploitation. In masquerading as strategy, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't flash the documents like a courtroom prop. Instead, she retrieved a stapled packet from the stack in front of her. Ordinary in appearance, but devastating in substance. Her fingers didn't tremble. They turned each page like a prosecutor introducing evidence she had memorized, not just printed. 26:56, the studio lights reflected off the bold yellow highlights across the headers. There were no theatrics, just facts. Hard, dated, traceable. These are internal emails between Janine Pirro and her senior producers dated just 6 months ago. Her voice was steady, but laced with something deeper now. And not anger, not even disappointment, but weariness, the kind that comes from recognizing a system's rot and realizing that too many had smiled through it. Jasmine paused, flipped the top sheet, and continued. 27:28, she referred to one of her black guests as, and I quote, cheap ratings bait. The audience shifted in their seats. Audible discomfort crept across the room like a slow leak. Jasmine didn't flinch. She moved on. Another email describes a civil rights activist as annoying as a smoke alarm at 20:00 m. 27:52, there were no edits to soften the blow, no studio commentary to contextualize the language. These weren't off-the-cuff remarks. They were written, reviewed, sent, approved. The words sat on those pages like stains that refused to fade because they weren't accidental. They were intentional. This wasn't bias. It was a business model. 28:16, Jasmine let that truth hang for a breath, then turned to the final page. Her finger tapped gently at the bottom corner, as if underlining the next line before she even spoke it. And this one says it best. As long as they're yelling into the camera, we've got viewers. That was the quiet moment when the air in the studio changed again. 28:41, but this time it wasn't Jasmine who caused it. It was the audience. The line wasn't shocking because it was vulgar. It was shocking because it was familiar. Because it confirmed what so many already suspected. That pain had been turned into performance. That voices like Jasmine's had been invited on not to speak, but to stir, to serve as spectacle, not substance. Jasmine said nothing more. 29:11, she let the silence settle likeish over the set, and then from the third row a voice rose, not angry, not hysterical, but crystal clear, cutting through the stillness with quiet rage. How are you still allowed to sit here? No one moved to stop him. No security, no studio staff, no stage manager calling for calm because he wasn't disrupting anything. He was naming it. 29:38, and in that moment, his words didn't just belong to him. They belonged to every viewer who had felt manipulated. Every guest who had been invited to play a role rather than speak their truth. Jasmine didn't respond. She didn't need to. The question had already left a mark. 30:01, not on her, but on the show, the format, the woman beside her, and no lighting adjustment, no producer's edit, no PR cleanup could reverse what had just been seen and heard. The words from the audience, "How are you still allowed to sit here?" had done more than rupture the room. They had pierced through the final thread of Janine Pirro's constructed authority. The silence afterward wasn't passive. 30:25, it was accusatory, the kind of silence that demanded a response, not out of curiosity, but out of accountability. Janine sat frozen for a moment, her eyes blinking rapidly, as if trying to recalibrate a persona that had never been meant to stand under this kind of scrutiny. Her fingers clutched the edges of her cards, now useless in the wake of everything that had been laid bare. 30:50, and then with a stiff inhale, she leaned forward, grasping not for truth, but for control. Her voice broke through the static, not with force, but with the strained pitch of someone realizing too late that the old script no longer worked. This is a smear campaign, but it didn't resonate. 31:15, the words meant to carry outrage and conviction instead arrived hollow, limp, and weightless in the air that now belonged entirely to Jasmine. What was once a courtroom voice, sharp and exacting, now sounded thin, almost brittle, like a warning flare fired underwater. She had said it with the desperation of someone cornered, not accused, and the more she tried to stand behind the claim, the more it crumbled beneath her. 31:41, the audience didn't gasp, they didn't murmur, they watched. Still, the silence that followed wasn't the silence of disbelief. It was the silence of people who no longer needed to be convinced. They had heard her real words in the emails. They had seen her real priorities in the post-broadcast confession, and now they were watching her real reaction. 32:05, not remorse, not responsibility, but deflection. Janine's final defense, "This is a smear campaign," had barely left her lips before the room swallowed it whole. It didn't echo. It didn't even land. The words fell flat, not because they lacked volume, but because they lacked credibility. 32:30, and in that vacuum, in that fragile hush where the truth had already taken root, Jasmine moved. She didn't lunge or grandstand. She simply rose from her seat, straightened her spine, and walked one steady step at a time across the space that had once been drawn to separate host from guest, power from challenger. But the line didn't exist anymore. 32:55, Jasmine had already erased it with fact, with evidence, with dignity too grounded to be shaken. When she stopped, she was standing just beside Janine's desk, her posture calm, her eyes unwavering. She looked not just at Janine, but through her toward the audience, the cameras, the system watching behind the screen, and then with clarity that pierced deeper than any accusation, she delivered the sentence that would mark the moment for everyone who heard it. This isn't a campaign. 33:27, this is justice finally seen in full light. The words rang out, not with force, but with finality, like something long buried, finally unearthed and too undeniable to rebury. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't spectacle. It was liberation spoken out loud on a stage that had never been meant for someone like her to command. 33:49, the lights above flickered slightly, as if reacting to the shift, and in the control room, panic took hold. Cut now. Go to break. Switch camera 3. Get her out of frame. Fingers hovered over emergency controls. A director's voice cracked over the earpieces of the camera crew, issuing clipped commands through clenched teeth. Break now. But the feed didn't cut. Not yet. 34:13, because even though every technical system was armed to protect the brand, none of them had accounted for this truth that refused to yield. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't blink. The camera trained itself on her. Not by instruction, but by instinct. It knew where the story was. 34:33, and at that moment, the studio, the desk, the lights, the crew, even the audience no longer belonged to Janine Pirro. It didn't belong to producers or sponsors or commercial clocks. It belonged to Jasmine. And the light she had just turned on wasn't going out. The lights were still hot. The studio still on air, but outside its walls, the world had already begun to move. 35:04, what had started as a televised ambush was unraveling, live, raw, irreversible, and Jasmine Crockett, once positioned as the disposable foil, now stood as the voice millions hadn't realized they'd been waiting to hear. And as the final seconds of the broadcast ticked away before the control room could wrench the feed off air, the truth had already escaped the building. 35:28, one clip, one sentence, one line of clarity against decades of manipulation. That was all it took. Jasmine's final words, "This is justice," finally seen in full light, spread like fire through dry brush. And in the digital age, fire doesn't wait. Within minutes, phones were recording the screen. 35:52, within 20, clips had been ripped, captioned, subtitled, and posted. And within 2 hours, the internet didn't just react. It exploded. On Twitter, the hashtag #PirroExposed began trending by the half-hour mark. First in major cities, then nationally. Within 90 minutes, it had overtaken headlines in Washington, New York, Atlanta, and Los Angeles. The tag wasn't just political. It was personal. 36:24, I stitched together reckoning made of screenshots, transcripts, video fragments, and first-person accounts from women and guests who had once sat across from Janine and been treated as tools, not voices. Beside it, Let Truth Speak surged in tandem. An anthem more than a slogan written in thousands of posts that range from raw fury to quiet vindication. 36:55, tweets poured in from civil rights advocates, former newsroom interns, and ordinary viewers who had once tuned into Janine's show and left feeling something they couldn't name until now. One tweet from a former black staffer at the network gained over 1 million views in under an hour. She once told me, "Don't bring guests who make the audience uncomfortable." 37:15, tonight, Jasmine Crockett made history by doing exactly that. Let truth speak. The floodgates had opened. Corporate America noticed fast. By the end of the second hour, 3 major sponsors, 2 financial firms, and 1 global tech brand issued separate but similarly worded public statements. The language was crisp, calculated, but the message underneath was unmistakable. 37:42, we are evaluating our ongoing partnership with the network in light of recent developments. Behind the polished PR language, the meaning was clear. Money was moving, and for the first time in years, not in Janine's favor. Internal memos began to circulate through ad agencies. Too volatile, no longer aligned with brand values. 38:07, the shield of influence that had protected Janine for so long was no longer airtight. Because advertisers don't fear outrage, they fear accountability when outrage starts to sound like truth. And then came the letter. At 10:43 p.m. Eastern Time, just under 3 hours after the broadcast ended, a public statement began circulating from a coalition of 27 former federal prosecutors. Some had served under Republican administrations. 38:43, others had served under Democrats. All of them had once sworn to uphold the rule of law. Now their signatures lined the bottom of a digital document titled In Defense of Accountability, a public statement on truth and broadcasting. The second paragraph hit like a gavel. What the American public witnessed tonight was not chaos. It was clarity. 39:07, for too long, truth has been sacrificed at the altar of manufactured outrage. Tonight, Representative Jasmine Crockett reclaimed the space where justice and truth are too often made invisible. This was not a media moment. This was a civic one. The letter was read by legal scholars, former judges, and sitting members of Congress within minutes. 39:40, a quote from its closing line was picked up and repeated across major networks and independent outlets before sunrise. This is not the collapse of a brand. This is the beginning of a reckoning, and it belongs to all of us. Every platform responded. Instagram filled with side-by-side images. Janine's stunned silence contrasted against Jasmine's unwavering stance. TikTok turned the 40:05, conned uncut clip into a movement-stitched recaptioned remixed with a generation too often tuned out suddenly leaning in. YouTube's homepage is populated with reaction videos, breakdowns, and live streams where creators across the political spectrum said what had become obvious. This wasn't about politics. This was about power. And someone finally looked it in the eye. 40:34, meanwhile, Fox News executives met behind closed doors. The PR director's phone didn't stop vibrating. A senior producer had already drafted a statement. One anchor refused to go live until something is said, and across the newsroom, the chilling realization set in. The story had left the building. It was now in the hands of millions, and they weren't letting go. 41:01, the moment the studio lights dimmed and the broadcast ended, the world outside kept spinning. But Janine Pirro did not reappear. She had entered the evening as the architect of control, a figure whose voice had been injected in living rooms for decades. She exited it not with the signature of a closing monologue, but with the sharp, clean vacuum of total absence, not suspended, not removed. 41:31, she simply disappeared like a ghost who had realized too late the walls were see-through. No follow-up tweet, no rebuttal segment, no written statement. For a woman who had made a career weaponizing immediacy, the delay in response spoke louder than any closing argument she had ever delivered. 41:58, and in an age where disappearance always prompts speculation, Janine's silence became its own kind of confession. By sunrise the next morning, millions had watched the final confrontation on loop. Jasmine Crockett's line, "This is justice," finally seen in full light, was being printed on protest posters and quoted beneath headlines. The broadcast wasn't just memorable, it was historic. 42:22, and Janine, so used to riding the wave of her own controversies, did something she had never done before. She retreated, vanished, evaporated. No apology, no denial, no fight. Her social media team, usually aggressive in framing her as fearless, quietly deleted scheduled posts for the week. No holiday greetings, no book promotions, no talking points, just silence, which for someone like her was the loudest sound in the room. 42:56, when Saturday arrived a week after the broadcast, viewers tuned in expecting fire. What they found was a substitution. No Janine, no acknowledgement, a bland mid-tier anchor sat in her place introducing pre-approved topics with lifeless neutrality. The network offered only a vague line at the top of the hour. "Judge Pirro is off this evening." We'll return to regular programming shortly. That phrase off this evening was all they said. 43:24, no timeline, no reason, and most importantly, no end date. By Monday, media insiders were buzzing. It wasn't just about her disappearance. It was about what wasn't being said. Janine wasn't on leave. She hadn't fallen ill. And sources confirmed there had been no vacation filed in the talent calendar. Her chair had gone cold, not through policy, but through panic. 43:50, executives refused to name it, but staff inside the network knew what had happened. Jasmine hadn't just humiliated Janine. She had made the receipts too visible to ignore. The kind of visible that corporate legal teams can't bury. The kind of visible that compliance teams are required to investigate. 44:15, the kind that board members call meetings about. Internally, executives were torn between two instincts: contain the fallout or amputate the risk. Janine had been profitable for years. Controversial, yes, but profitable. She brought in a certain audience, spoke to a certain rage, made advertisers nervous but excited. 44:40, but now that same rage, the one she had spent decades cultivating, was pointed back at her. Social media was on fire. Pyro Exposed wasn't just trending, it was sticking. Her old sound bites were being repurposed by critics with timestamps. TikTok creators were playing side B. 45:05, side comparisons of her berating black female politicians with her meek response when finally questioned. It wasn't just bad optics. It was systemic unraveling, and the advertisers were watching. By the end of week 1, 3 of the show's top sponsors had frozen contracts. Not because of pressure, because of exposure. Brands don't care about controversy. 45:30, they care about what they can't explain to shareholders. And this time there was no buffer. The clips weren't hearsay. They were on air. Jasmine had walked into a broadcast trap and broke it open from the inside. And Janine, once the face of righteous fury, had nothing left to throw but the word smear campaign, which dissolved on contact. What followed wasn't a campaign against her. 45:55, it was a mirror held up too long, too close, and too clearly. Week 2 arrived. Still no Janine. Her studio remained intact. The desk untouched, but the seat had become radioactive. Internal memos leaked to the press showed that producers had been instructed to prepare for a restructured Q3 lineup. Translated, Janine was no longer guaranteed her hour. 46:21, her name was quietly removed from the upcoming fall media tour. Her publisher postponed the launch of her next book. Colleagues who once praised her publicly now referred to her as a controversial figure in interviews. The ground under her was not shifting. It was disintegrating. 46:42, some of her supporters online tried to launch defenses. She's being silenced. It's cancel culture. But they couldn't argue with what had been shown. Emails with her name on them. Language no one could spin as a joke. A mic catching her say, "I don't care about truth as long as the ratings stay up." 47:05, and when defenders said she was ambushed, viewers remembered what they saw. A woman given every chance to respond in choosing silence. By week 3, the silence wasn't just strategic. It was existential. Janine had become a liability no one wanted to name. When a public figure disappears, people ask, where is she? But when no one answers, not even her allies, something deeper happens. People stop asking, they move on. 47:35, they realize the show doesn't need her to survive, that her absence isn't temporary. It's revealing. And somewhere in that same window, a shift occurred in the public's language. They stopped calling what happened a takedown. They started calling it a turning point, a reckoning. 47:54, not just for Janine Pirro, but for the machine she stood for. The machine that had always spun outrage into influence, always framed control as confidence, always edited dissent into disarray. That machine had miscalculated. It thought Jasmine Crockett would fold. Instead, she flipped the lens. 48:16, and now the woman who once ended every broadcast with fire in her voice had left her show in silence. Not suspended, not censored, revealed. And that's the difference. Because a suspension implies a mistake, a misstep, a temporary wound, but a revelation that lingers, that stains, that doesn't need to scream to be heard. By week 4, the seat remained empty. 48:39, still no Janine. Still no word. And in homes across the country, people stopped asking when is she coming back. They asked something far more telling. Should she? And deep down they knew the answer. It didn't end when Janine Pirro vanished from the screen. That was just the beginning. 49:03, her absence, cold and unexplained, was supposed to be a pressure release, a way to contain the explosion without admitting there had been one. But the country had already seen too much. The truth had gone live. The footage had been clipped, shared, remixed, dissected, and studied. And what Jasmine Crockett had said, this isn't a campaign. This is justice finally seen in full light. Was no longer just a line from a confrontation. 49:28, it had become a crack in the wall, and light was pouring through. At first, it moved through expected channels, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, but didn't stay there. The story spread not because it was sensational, but because it was clarifying. People who had never heard Jasmine's name before now saw her as the woman who stood her ground without shouting, who dismantled decades of spin using nothing but receipts, poise, and a voice that didn't shake. 49:59, even when the system tried to shake her more than anything else, people saw something they hadn't expected to see on a major network. A lie unraveling in real time and no one able to stop it. Colleges took notice. Professors in journalism, law, political science, people who had long taught case studies from Watergate or the Pentagon Papers now added the Crockett-Pirro broadcast to their syllabi. Not a scandal as pedagogy. 50:27, one media ethics professor at Columbia called it a moment when truth outpaced production. Students analyze body language, sequencing, framing tactics. How Jasmine, without raising her voice, had reversed the flow of power in a studio designed to diminish her. Civil rights organizations echoed the sentiment. 50:52, the NAACP issued a rare statement praising not just Jasmine's composure, but her methodology. This was not a takedown. It was a restoration of standards. Black Women's PAC shared a digital archive titled Number Let Her Speak, a toolkit for public discourse featuring annotated clips from the broadcast and templates for responding to media manipulation. 51:20, across forums and panels, a new question emerged, not about whether Jasmine had won, but whether this was the beginning of a shift. Meanwhile, supporters of Janine scrambled for a counter-narrative, but it wasn't sticking. They claimed it was an ambush, a setup, an act of political theater, but none of it held. 51:41, not against the footage, not against the emails, not against quote, I don't care about truth as long as the ratings stay up. Caught on a hot mic. You can't reframe a confession. You can't spin a tremor in your voice after being confronted with evidence. And that was the problem for Janine's defenders. The tape didn't lie, but the echo was about more than one woman. 52:06, as her words spread, Jasmine's image began to take on a life beyond the clip. Artists painted murals of her mid-sentence, eyes steady, hand-holding the DOJ folder she had pulled from beneath her notes. A spoken-word artist in Chicago performed a monologue titled The Table Flipped Itself. 52:30, using the exact court-precise tone Jasmine had used in that studio, flipping every accusation back into a mirror. The moment became art, not because of spectacle, but because of truth shape finally being visible. And Jasmine, she stayed quiet. No press tour, no self-congratulations. In fact, she rejected every major interview request in the first week. CNN, MSNBC, even NPR. She didn't go. She didn't need to. The work spoke louder than her commentary ever could. 52:57, when a journalist from The Atlantic reached out for an exclusive, she replied with one sentence. I'm not interested in telling the story louder. I'm interested in helping others see how to build one better. Instead, she reappeared 5 days later unannounced on the campus of Howard University. No security detail, no team, just her. 53:22, she stepped into a lecture hall full of law students and began speaking without cameras, without filters, without fanfare. A visiting student recorded just 60 seconds on her phone, a single answer Jasmine gave to a young black woman who asked how to deal with being labeled too assertive. 53:42, Jasmine paused and then said, "Let them label you. They have to name the thing they fear before they try to erase it. Just make sure that when they call you loud, you are also right. When they call you unprofessional, make sure you've brought the facts. 54:00, and when they call you angry, smile because it means they're no longer comfortable with your silence." That clip, raw, quiet, off the record, surpassed 5 million views in 48 hours. Suddenly, the narrative had inverted. Jasmine wasn't a politician. She wasn't even just a lawyer. She had become a reference point for women, for people of color, for anyone who had been talked over, edited out, or told to calm down when all they were doing was telling the truth. 54:27, and it wasn't that she had humiliated Jeanine Pirro. It was that she hadn't needed to. She let the documents speak. She let the emails speak. She let the camera finally turn toward the right person. Do what it was supposed to do, reveal. Back at the network, producers whispered about her with a strange mix of fear and awe. 54:46, one caught on a hot mic during a rehearsal muttered, "I've never seen someone walk into a setup and flip the whole thing upside down without raising her voice." And it was true. Jasmine hadn't fought back the way people expected. She hadn't yelled. She had interrupted. She had done something far more dangerous. She had been undeniable. 55:10, in New York, a group of young journalists launched a podcast series titled Unedited. What they didn't expect her to say, focused entirely on media manipulation and guest framing. Their first episode, a breakdown of every camera cut and line interruption used on Jasmine in past interviews, compared to the uninterrupted 40 minutes from Justice and Truth. The difference was staggering. One student host put it bluntly. 55:36, when she was edited, she was emotional. When she wasn't, she was brilliant. The truth wasn't just in the content. It was in the airtime. And in D.C., congressional aides began holding internal workshops on narrative containment. How to stop truth from being repackaged before it hits the public. Jasmine didn't teach them. She didn't even attend, but they used her anyway. 56:05, used her presence, her methods, her timing, because what she had done wasn't just rare. It was repeatable. And that's what terrified her opponents most. Because once someone shows others how to take back the microphone, you can't mute that knowledge. And so the echo grew, not because she demanded it, but because truth once seen doesn't shrink. It multiplies. It spreads. 56:28, it whispers across podiums and shouts inside classrooms. It fills the space where silence used to dominate. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't ask for applause. It just keeps moving like Jasmine. Forward, unshaken, unedited. Finally, undeniable. By the 6th week, the silence was no longer an anomaly. It was the new normal. 56:50, Jeanine Pirro's name had disappeared from the network crawl. Her photo quietly removed from the primetime banner that once broadcast her image nightly to millions. Her chair remained empty, not out scheduling confusion or technical oversight, but out of necessity. She hadn't just become controversial. 57:14, she had become unsustainable in the editorial halls of the network she once commanded with certainty. She was now a cautionary tale, not because she had lost control, but because the machine that once protected her had been shown in real time to be complicit. Inside the executive suite, a reckoning was underway, one not driven by morality, but by metrics. Viewership data didn't lie. 57:40, the Jasmine Crockett confrontation had sparked the highest viewer retention the network had seen in over a year. But in a twist that confused executives and terrified advertisers, the replay value wasn't favoring their brand. Clips were not being shared with hashtags like #sport or #free speech. They were going viral with captions like "This is what accountability looks like." 58:04, and she came with facts, not fury. Even worse for the network, the most replayed moments based on digital analysis weren't the fiery exchanges. They were the pauses, the silences, the close-ups on Jeanine's trembling hands. The camera pans to Jasmine's unreadable expression as she delivered line after surgical line with calm, devastating precision. 58:31, for the network, the threat wasn't the outrage, it was the clarity. Internally, the conversation shifted from when can we bring Janine back to can we afford to a route meeting between programming heads, brand integrity teams, and legal advisor, produced a stunning proposal, a new on-air standards policy, something the network had previously mocked other stations for attempting. 58:58, the document was drafted quietly without public announcement and distributed to anchors, panel hosts, and producers with a bland email header. Updated guest engagement protocols internal only, but the contents were anything but bland. It outlined what could no longer be done under the guise of commentary. No pre-edited clips presented as spontaneous guest reactions. 59:22, no framing guests with unverified background slates, no off-camera editorializing during breaks while mics remain hot. And most notably, all live confrontational segments must include full uncut release clauses for the guest. To some, it read like policy. To others, it read like an admission. 59:44, we're not just changing the rules, we're admitting we broke them behind the scenes. The shift in tone was even more dramatic. A junior associate producer in charge of PRI for political guests reportedly refused to participate in a panel segment that mirrored the Pyro Crockett ambush structure. Her words leaked to the press were sharp and simple. 1 hour and 8 seconds, I'm not going to help manufacture optics that can get someone's reputation killed in the first 5 minutes. That's not journalism. That's warfare. She wasn't fired. She was promoted. The ripple effect wasn't confined to the network. Other studios took notice. A mid-size competitor quietly paused development on politically charged debate show after test. 1 hour and 29 seconds, audiences said repeatedly that they didn't want to see another Jasmine moment, but from the other side. It wasn't fear of confrontation that unsettled people. It was fear of watching someone being set up again. Jasmine hadn't just revealed a bias. She had decoded a tactic and viewers now saw it in other shows. They saw it in tone, in clip timing, in the difference between a mic being left on or mysteriously cut. 1 hour and 55 seconds, everywhere the Jasmine moment was referenced, a new phrase began to emerge across campuses, newsrooms, and classrooms. Air it in full, a simple demand, a radical one, because the public was tired of post-Prouian narratives. They had seen what happens when truth isn't clipped, when fire doesn't get framed as chaos, when a woman's conviction isn't reduced to an attitude problem. They had seen what justice looked like uncut. 1 hour 1 minute and 24 seconds, and they wanted more. And yet, through all this, Jasmine remained deliberately quiet. She made no appearances at rallies. She didn't host podcasts. She didn't sell books or monetize the moment. When a prominent liberal talk show host offered her an exclusive appearance and suggested she launch a media channel of her own, her response was clear and immediate. I'm not here to cash in on clarity. I'm here to protect it. 1 hour 1 minute and 55 seconds, instead, she used the moment to do what she'd always done, legislate. Her office introduced a bipartisan bill requiring media institutions to disclose editorial alterations in political coverage when clips are condensed for commentary purposes. While the bill itself would face an uphill battle in Congress, its introduction alone sent shock waves. 1 hour 2 minutes and 20 seconds, it wasn't about censorship. It was about transparency. And Jasmine knew that even if it didn't pass, the debate would force conversations into places where silence had long been policy. In education circles, her presence had already become canonical. Law professors began incorporating her testimony, rhetorical methods, and posture under pressure into ethics units. 1 hour 2 minutes and 47 seconds, in a groundbreaking panel at Stanford, a media professor declared Jasmine's confrontation the most masterclass use of courtroom discipline applied to a broadcast space in modern American history. It wasn't about passion. It was about precision. Meanwhile, students from historically black colleges and universities began organizing under a new name, Clarity Collective, using Jasmine's moment as a framework for dismantling media bias and producing youth accountability journalism. 1 hour 3 minutes and 22 seconds, their slogan, "We don't need more airtime, we need fair time." They didn't ask for permission. They took back the mic. And through all of this, the most remarkable thing was that Jasmine never seemed to change. She didn't alter her walk, her tone, her approach. She still showed up to the House with binders full of policy. She still argued case law like a Professor Cross, examining time. 1 hour 3 minutes and 45 seconds, she still wore the same steady steel beneath her voice. But now the world around her had shifted. The lights didn't glare at her anymore. They waited. The cameras didn't rush to cut. They listened. Because somewhere in those 7 minutes of live television and the weeks that followed, something had been rewritten. 1 hour 4 minutes and 4 seconds, not the rules, the expectation that people would now notice. The moment a woman was interrupted, that they would question why one clip gets edited and another doesn't, that they would remember that justice doesn't always look like a verdict. It sometimes looks like a woman sitting still while someone else unravels. 1 hour 4 minutes and 28 seconds, and as Janine Pirro's silence stretched from weeks into what now resembled an ending, Jasmine's echo didn't just remain, it evolved. From a clip to a conversation, from a confrontation to a case study, from a singular voice to a standard. She didn't just survive the moment they designed to crush her. She turned it into the one thing they never expected, a precedent. 1 hour 4 minutes and 51 seconds, and in the weeks after the confrontation faded from the trending lists, when Janine's chair was no longer news, and Jasmine's moment had become material for scholars, something deeper remained. Not the memory of who shouted loudest, not the viral clip with the most views, but a quiet, undeniable shift in how people understood power. 1 hour 5 minutes and 15 seconds, not just who holds it, but how it's held and who gets punished for using it right. It was no longer about the woman who had vanished. It was about the woman who had remained and what it cost her to do so. Because if there was one thing the moment exposed more clearly than anything else, it was this. 1 hour 5 minutes and 35 seconds, Jasmine Crockett was never meant to win in that room. She was invited to be boxed in, framed, discredited. She walked into a studio designed like a courtroom, except the judge, jury, and camera angles were already aligned against her. The lighting wasn't neutral. The producers weren't impartial. The questions weren't accidental. Every second was calibrated to trigger her into confirming their narrative. 1 hour 6 minutes and 1 second, the angry black woman who doesn't know her place. And yet, she sat still. She let the trap spring. And when it did, she didn't fight it. She revealed it. That is the human lesson that still pulses beneath the surface of this entire story. It's not just about media manipulation. It's about how resilience survives when no one's clapping for it. 1 hour 6 minutes and 24 seconds, when someone walks into a space knowing they've been invited not as an equal, but as bait, and they still show up, still speak, still sit tall. Jasmine's victory wasn't just intellectual. It was moral, spiritual. It was the strength of someone who understood that injustice doesn't always scream. 1 hour 6 minutes and 47 seconds, sometimes it smiles across the table while handing you a microphone and dares you to stay calm. That's what she did. And for millions watching, the lesson wasn't about style. It was about survival. Because how many people, especially women of color, had sat across from a desk like that in an office, a courtroom, a classroom, knowing the outcome was already scripted? How many had been told, don't raise your voice? 1 hour 7 minutes and 16 seconds, don't sound too certain. Don't fight back. Smile through it. But Jasmine's lesson wasn't in compliance. It was in control. She didn't contort herself to make the room comfortable. She made the room adjust to the weight of her truth. And when the system demanded she either explode or shrink, she didn't either. 1 hour 7 minutes and 39 seconds, she expanded because justice isn't always delivered in verdicts or applause. Sometimes it's the way someone holds eye contact while being misrepresented. Sometimes it's the clarity of a sentence that slices through decades of stereotype. Sometimes it's the refusal to flinch while being called everything but right. Jasmine was right and she knew it. That's what scared them. 1 hour 8 minutes and 3 seconds, not her presence, but her precision, her refusal to be anything other than herself. No louder, no quieter, no softer, no angrier than truth required. And that's where the deeper injustice lies. In how much effort she had to summon just to be treated as credible. In a just world, Jasmine's documents would have spoken for themselves. Her legal background, her preparation, her arguments should have been enough. 1 hour 8 minutes and 32 seconds, but in this world, she had to bring receipts, restraint, and resolve just to be heard at the same volume others were handed by default. The lesson isn't just that she endured it. It's that she shouldn't have had to. That's what stings beneath the victory. That's what makes it human. Not the fact that she won, but the fact that she had to bleed just to get into the ring. 1 hour 8 minutes and 56 seconds, but she didn't bleed alone because something else happened that night. Something far bigger than a viral moment. Jasmine's posture, her silence, her precision became permission. Permission for people watching, people like her, people unlike her to no longer apologize for the space they occupy. She didn't just speak truth to power. 1 hour 9 minutes and 22 seconds, she showed what it looked like when power tried to silence truth and failed. Not with fists, not with fury, but with a calm that said, "You will not redefine me. You will not edit me. You will not bury me under your lighting and your laugh tracks." 1 hour 9 minutes and 42 seconds, and for the first time in a long time, people saw what that kind of dignity looked like. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was unflinching. Because Jasmine taught something many had forgotten. The truth doesn't have to yell. It just has to stand its ground. That's the real transformation. Not in the network, not in the ratings in us. In the way we now pause when we see someone being cornered on TV. 1 hour 10 minutes and 8 seconds, in the way we notice who gets to speak uninterrupted. In the way we recognize when a calm woman is being provoked into fury. Not for the truth but for the headline. We saw the trap. And now that we've seen it, we can't unsee it. Because Jasmine didn't just defeat a host. She exposed a blueprint. And now others are picking it up. 1 hour 10 minutes and 29 seconds, not to fight, but to reclaim. To walk into boardrooms, classrooms, courtrooms, and say, "I won't soften to make you feel safe. I won't shrink to make you look tall. I am not here to audition for your tolerance. I am here to represent the truth." That's what Jasmine did. That's the human lesson. 1 hour 10 minutes and 49 seconds, that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just doesn't blink, and sometimes that's enough to change everything. Thank you for watching until this moment, and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. 1 hour 11 minutes and 11 seconds, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this.